Truth is sometimes stranger than fiction, and fortunately for us, snuff films don't really exist. They're the part of urban legend, or so the movie 8mm tells us back from the 1990s with Nicolas Cage. That movie scared the shit out of me as a young man, the psychological aspects of that movie. And if you haven't seen it, you're going to want to check it out. But what we do know for sure is that has to be completely fiction. There is no such thing as snuff films. That's an urban legend. Police officers certainly don't engage in prostitution, doing drugs, and certainly not investigating or hampering an investigation by the FBI into a Long Island serial killer. That would be just the stuff of fictional movies like 8mm. Or so we're told. Because if it was true, we'd have to ask ourselves, what the hell's going on in Suffolk County, New York? Before we begin, I want to remind you that this is just for entertainment purposes only. I'm not making allegations. The questions that I ask in this video, while presented with receipts that are very, very solid and cause somebody to say, the conclusions that you might reach are of your own, and the questions that I ask are simply designed to be a thought experiment. It's not meant to make direct allegations. However, I think you will find these questions to be extremely interesting, especially when you watch the receipts. So again, one more point. This is just a form of entertainment. It's just asking questions. It's a thought experiment, and what you do with that information is of your own. I am not making allegations, and nor am I the news. I am just reporting on the news, the speculations and jumps to conclusions that you might make after watching this are your own. Rex Heuermann began killing, they believe, in the 1990s, somewhere early 1990s. And the movie 8mm, which it was filmed in 1999, is about a series of snuff films that were made around the 90s. And so that starts to put these two stories, these strange coincidences, together. Today, Rex Heuermann is accused of 7 murders, possibly leading up to 11 to 13 murders, and maybe more going into the future. There are rumors that Rex Heuermann may have been killing for over 30 years, starting in the 90s and up through the 2020s, and that he may have killed in multiple states. This New York may be just one place that he killed, and so the number of bodies that might get attributed to Rex Heuermann is continuing to grow and may grow to be one of the most prolific serial killers in America. But again, all of this is alleged, so keep that in mind. Now, when I was a young man, this movie 8mm with Nicolas Cage was terrifying. I mean, it was psychologically burning into my memory. I remember the ending of this film tremendously. If you haven't seen the film and you can stomach that kind of darkness, you might want to watch this film because it's got some weird and interesting tie-ins potentially to the Rex Heuermann case, and I'll explain those in detail. Only one of which is, for example, an individual in this film known as the Machine, depicted here with Nicolas Cage. He's a large, physically imposing man. In the movie, I remember him being much larger. Maybe it was because of my perspective as a young man, but I remember him being a large physical specimen, this man known as the Machine, who would torture people. And it brings back memories, if you will, when you look at Rex Heuermann, this 6'4", ogreish-looking human being, as they often refer to him. And it brings back memories of the Machine, this killer who was a massive man who overpowered his female victims and did things to them on camera. And so when we get into the details of this story, and you get to see what it was that was allegedly on Rex Heuermann's computer and what it ties into the snuff film industry, it brings back dark shades of this movie 8mm. Now, let me give you a refresher. If you haven't watched 8mm, this is going to contain some spoilers, but the movie has been around since 1999. So in a way, I can't really apologize too much if I'm giving you spoilers for a movie that's been out there in folklore for forever. To basically cut forward, basically the movie goes like this. An elderly woman hires a private investigator to secretly and discreetly look into a 16mm film that she found in her husband's belongings after he passed. They were a wealthy couple. She found among her husband's belongings a 16mm film that depicted what appeared to be a snuff film, that a young woman was being tortured, sexually assaulted, and murdered on film, and it was in her husband's possessions. It had the ring of authenticity, and she needed to know discreetly and quietly, because the family was of money and it would just completely destroy them if it ever came out. Did her husband pay for this snuff film? Was it real? Was that a real human being that died, or is it just a fictional movie? If it was real, who paid for the movie? And what part did her husband have in that thing? And that was the kind of centerpiece of this film, was investigating this. And all throughout the movie 8mm, is a statement that is still kind of rings through real life law enforcement today, which is that that snuff films in particular are kind of an urban myth, that there's no credible evidence that that there's an industry, if you will, around the idea of filming murders for money, that people will pay to watch people murdered. In particular, snuff films happen to be, of course, often depicted with sexual violence towards women ending in their death, and that is the primary definition of a snuff film, of which it is mostly referred to as an urban legend. It doesn't really exist. And so throughout the film, you keep hearing Nicolas Cage and various people say, well, isn't a snuff film an urban myth? It doesn't really exist. And then, of course, in the movie, what you find out is not only does it exist, but there's a ring of people making these movies. And the ending of that movie is shocking to the senses, if you will. Again, if you haven't watched it, you might want to check it out. And again, at the moment, you may feel like this is completely circumstantial and just a lot of reaches, but wait until we finish up very shortly here with the receipts, as I call it, mainstream media sources. And I understand a large part of this is going to come from the New York Post, and I get it. New York Post is not a credible paper, if you will. It's more like a tabloid, which uses sensational headlines, and they tend to glom on to the things of a sensational nature. Having said that even though the New York Post is kind of more on the sensational side, what they report in their article, which we're going to link to the 8mm movie, is indeed factual. They are real facts. It's just that the New York Post tends to spin it in a more sensational manner. So again, keep that in mind. Now, let me just give you some brief rundowns before we get into the receipts. So here are some of the connection points. Again, Rex Heuermann's killings allegedly started in the 90s. This movie is from the 90s. The Machine is a large, physically imposing individual. Rex Heuermann is a large, physically imposing individual. The killings appear to be a ring that was doing snuff films in New York. Ultimately, Nicolas Cage goes across the country in 8mm and ends up traveling back to New York, where he finds that this ring was operating in Long Island area of New York. This is where the Long Island serial killer Rex Heuermann is at. So another weird kind of connection. And then you get into the whole snuff film industry, that it's a real thing, in this particular story, a chief of police, James Burke, actually was allegedly found with a snuff film in his possession, that Rex Heuermann was possibly a connected friend or acquaintance with James Burke, the chief of police, who stifled the FBI investigation trying to stop them from finding a serial killer. So then you put all these things together, and you've got a chief of police who allegedly had frequented prostitutes, disparagingly, by the way, referred to prostitutes as just prostitutes. Nobody gives a shit about them dying, and therefore wasn't all that interested in looking after the serial killer who was out there killing prostitutes, because after all, they're just prostitutes. Who cares? They're hookers. Nobody gives a shit. Those are on records of things that James Burke had said. Watching the documentaries on Netflix, had a great one called The Gone Girls, a 3-part series. It talks all about James Burke's attitude as chief of police towards prostitutes as being nothing more than just hookers. Who cares if they die? And then, of course, you find out that he was using hookers, that he was frequenting hookers, may have been friends, or at least strong acquaintances with Rex Heuermann, the Long Island serial killer, allegedly the Long Island serial killer. So then one has to ask, why would the chief of police be stymieing and trying to stop the FBI from finding the Long Island serial killer if maybe they have a connection together, and maybe the chief of police had a snuff film in his possession? Now all of a sudden, this crazy movie that's just fictional about an industry that doesn't really exist. There's nobody that pays for people to be killed on film. Snuff films are a thing of urban legend. Maybe a chief of police in the New York area is covering up the Long Island serial killer who may have been making snuff videos, and maybe that's just a connection that we need to pay attention to. So again, while that all sounds completely crazy and out there, let's get into the receipts now. All right, I'm going to pull this up on the screen. All right, we're going to start with an article from The Sun. It has a lot of receipts in this. And now The Sun is just one of dozens and dozens. I said before that we were going to look into the New York Post, and I did have one of those things queued. I think we're going to look into to The Sun, and we're going to look into Islip, New York's paper here, and probably just avoid the New York Post one in particular. However, the Post covered it extensively as well, but this one has a lot in it. So let's go over the receipts. Now, there's a lot of pieces in here, and they're not going to all be in perfect order, so I'm going to read through them. We're going to end this series, this teaser episode to get you interested, whet your appetite as to what might be coming in the LISK series, the Long Island Serial Killer / Gilgo Beach Murders, to see if you're interested in this kind of stuff. I have a particular penchant for police corruption. I frickin' get bent out of shape when I see corrupt cops, when I see them doing things and arresting people for the very things that they do. And then when you come up with the connection that maybe the police officers themselves were friends with or acquaintances with the Long Island serial killer and took steps to cover up his tracks. And there was allegations, by the way, even in Gone Girls, the documentary, that it is possible that cops could have been, that James Burke may have actually killed a prostitute. Again, allegations I'm not making. The show on Netflix, for example, hinted at that. This article that we're going to read might hint at that. So again, before you bust my nuts about how I'm jumping to wild conclusions, I'm borrowing stories from mainstream media documentaries that are out there, and I'm just looking at it from my own perspective and saying, isn't that interesting? Let's get into this now. So from The Sun, Gilgo Beach lawyer calls for new probe into disgraced cop chief James Burke over snuff film link in Rex Heuermann documents. So again, at the very beginning, you thought, well, you're just making shit up. What do you mean snuff film? There's no such thing. Nobody says that but you, devil's advocates. No, not only does The Sun, New York Post, a whole bunch of different places have talked about the snuff film link. So I'm just tying it together for you to show you what I see. The disgraced cop who botched the crucial early stages of the Long Island serial killer LISK probe should be investigated in connection with the case over potential snuff film links to Rex Heuermann, a lawyer says. Yes, not just devil's advocates, other people are reporting that there may be snuff film elements to what Rex Heuermann was doing. And not just that Rex Heuermann may have been making snuff films, but police officers may have been purchasing, owning those snuff films, watching the snuff films, enjoying the snuff films, and covering up for a serial killer who was making said snuff films. Now, all of that may be completely wild-ass speculation, but I hope I have your attention because this shit does need investigation. Absolutely. There's a picture of Rex Heuermann in a firing range. Here's James Burke. This is the chief of police, James Burke, being arrested in 2015. James Burke, pictured in 2015, has long been blamed for derailing the Gilgo Beach murder probe. This cop, who was, by the way, known by his peers as being a corrupt cop before he got promoted to the chief of police by a corrupt district attorney. Oh my God, if you aren't getting intrigued by this story, something's wrong with you. A corrupt district attorney who used James Burke before he was in law enforcement as a young man to basically get somebody else fingered for a crime they may not have committed, then later watches over this guy's career and gets him promoted and promotes him to chief of police, despite the fact that police around him are like, how did James Burke get promoted like 4 levels of promotion to chief of police from like having allegations of being a dirty cop who uses prostitutes and does drugs? This dirty cop gets promoted to chief of police of Suffolk County by a district attorney who basically is returning a favor as a young boy. All of that shit, if that's blowing your mind, like, what are you fucking talking about? What are you fucking talking about? Either watch my previous video on this and get yourself boned up on it, or go watch Gone Girls, episode 2 in particular, the Netflix series, will blow your mind about Spoda and James Burke, 2 corrupt individuals that went to jail. Both of them went to jail. And this is all tied to the Long Island serial killer. This story is much, much more than just a serial killer. Way more than that. So let's continue. This is the attorney, John Ray, routinely called for James Burke to be investigated by police. He was basically representing the family of Shannon Gilbert. Again, that name, if you aren't familiar, you'll get boned up on it quick, either watching my series. I'll be talking about Shannon Gilbert regularly, but talking about John Ray many times, James Burke. You'll get to know these names by the back of your hand by the time you get done watching my series, if you watch the LISK / Gilgo Beach murder series that I'm doing. Now, Saturday marked 1 year since the hulking 6'4" former architect was arrested on a busy Manhattan street. That's Rex Heuermann, again, large individual. He reminds me of the Machine from 8mm, just putting that out there. Now, in court documents released last month, prosecutors unveiled a trove of evidence against Heuermann, including a deleted document recovered from his hard drive that officials allege he used to meticulously plan his killings and map out steps to cover his tracks. Now, stop right there. When they tore apart Rex Heuermann's house, when they decided that he might have been involved with at least 4 murders, maybe 7 murders, he's officially charged with 7 right now, maybe 11, maybe 13, maybe lots of murders. When they decided that he was their primary suspect and they decided they had enough evidence to arrest and they tore apart his house, his computer In his house, by the way, was a kill room, they believe, a room that he may have killed women in his home while his family was living in the house. Now, granted, his family may have been away on vacation when he killed some of the women. He may not have killed all the women in his house. All of that shit is all alleged. It's still coming out. The investigation is still underway. They tore apart his house. In that house, he had a computer that had been scrubbed, deleted files. However, police tell us that they recovered some of those files. One of those files, among other things that we're going to read about and when we get into the snuff film element, had details about how to commit crimes, how to get away with crimes, including how to take pictures of victims and then get rid of the pictures later, things like this, including how to find dumping grounds, how to get away with murder. All of those things allegedly were on a file that the police recovered from his deleted files. Detectives also allegedly recovered a cache of violent pornography from his computer that they claim aligned with how Castilla, that was his first alleged victim that they know about from 1993, and Taylor were found. So Taylor and Castilla were two of his earliest victims. Castilla, I believe, 1993. I think Taylor was from 2003. Again, dovetails up with the timing of the movie in the 1990s about a serial killer from Long Island, New York, who's killing. Now, do I believe that the director of 8mm knew what was going on here? And I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying it's really crazy. It makes that movie much more worth going back and watching, does it not? Now listen to this. So the horrifying images that were on that computer, the horrifying images included depictions of breast mutilation, vaginal torture, sex substitution, and sexualization of decapitated women, bondage, and whipping. So, and here's where it gets crazy. Violent sexual videos documenting actual murders or violation of corpses are otherwise known as snuff films. Prosecutors did not state whether they believe the material originated from or if the material was homemade. So they have not stated whether the snuff film type material, depictions of women being mutilated, tortured, sexually abused, and killed on camera. They're not saying whether or not those were just stuff that Rex Heuermann allegedly found online and was fantasizing about, or whether he made those videos on his computer. If he made those videos, he's making snuff films. If they were legitimate videos of people being killed, then they are snuff films. Now, if it's just what we would call murder porn, where people depict snuff films, but it's not real, it's just actors, and they often look very faked. And there's a weird ass group of people in society who get off on fantasizing about sexual crimes, but they're not actual crimes. Nobody actually died. But the question becomes, is they haven't stated whether or not what was on his hard drive was actual murdered women, and whether or not he's the one that recorded actual murdered women. We'll be fast forwarding here in a bit about James Burke having a snuff film in his possession and knowing Rex Heuermann. Did that snuff film belong to Rex Heuermann's personal collection in some way or another? Details in Heuermann's alleged planning document details reminders to get photo film and later dispose of the pics. So again, Heuermann's document he had a planning document about how he was supposedly going to kill people and do various things, reminding him of how to hide the facts of the crime afterwards. Talk about making photos or film and disposing of the pics later on. So it makes us wonder, is Rex Heuermann's video not just random things that he found on the internet, but actual videos and depictions and photos of the people that he tortured and killed in his own house? That's the $1 million question. The other $1 million question is, did James Burke have one of those in his possession? And is that why he covered up for the Long Island serial killer? Now, that's some crazy ass speculation. I'm asking questions. I'm not telling you that's what happened. Now, the inclusion of such details in the court documents was of particular interest to attorney John Ray. So when he heard about these snuff film stuff on his computer, the fact that he was talking about disposing of pictures later on, John Ray got really interested as an attorney. And he says James Burke, this is the chief of police, was sworn in as a Suffolk County police chief the following year and oversaw the crucial early stages of the Long Island serial killer investigation. James Burke, there was an investigation going on to the Gilgo Beach murders when James Burke was appointed to chief of police. That was already going on. There was a task force assembled when James Burke was promoted to chief of police, despite the fact that those around him wanted to know how the hell a cop with a history of corruption got promoted to chief of police. And the first thing he did was shut down the task force. He's called off the FBI off the investigation. He fired almost everybody involved in the task force looking into the Gilgo Beach murders. This was before they knew who Rex Heuermann was. They were trying to find out who the killer was. And James Burke, one of the first things he did when he took over as chief of police, newly appointed by Spoda, was to take steps to dismantle the task force and stop looking for the serial killer. Things that make you go, Now, Burke was widely criticized for mishandling the investigation. Mishandling or flat out corruption? You tell me. Mishandling is a nice way of saying fucking over the case against the serial killer. He actively blocked the FBI from assisting his department, in which critics believe was an attempt to conceal the corrupt culture that he was harboring and hide his own sordid exploits. So the chief of police, who uses hookers, does drugs, has been known to do that before getting promoted, may have just fired the FBI off the case and dismantled the task force so that they wouldn't start looking into his own crimes of using prostitutes and treating prostitutes as they're just hookers. Who the fuck cares about hookers? That was his attitude. That was known by fellow officers. Officers had heard him have the attitude, who the fuck cares about prostitutes? They're just prostitutes. So one has to ask, is that kind of man who's not going to look into a killer of prostitutes, who uses prostitutes and have the attitude of who cares what happens to prostitutes, they're just prostitutes, is exactly the kind of guy. And it gets worse. It gets worse. So let's read on. All right. So again, he was maybe attempting to conceal the corrupt culture and harboring and hiding his own sordid exploits, which included patronizing sex workers and taking hard drugs. This is something we know James Burke was doing, using prostitutes and using hard drugs and hampering the investigation into the Long Island serial killer. Why? Now, his 3-year tenure as a chief was marred in controversy and ended in 2015 after he was arrested for brutally beating a handcuffed suspect who'd stolen a bag from his patrol car containing sex toys and pornographic materials, including allegedly a snuff film. And he beat the fuck out of this prisoner and threatened to kill his mother and all these things, he beat this prisoner in front of other officers. And eventually one of those officers turned on Burke and said, yeah, I watched Burke beat the fuck out of this prisoner and threatened to kill his mother. And Burke goes to jail for that. So what was he trying to do? What exactly was trying? Some would argue all Burke was is he was personally mad because what happened, and this is the strangest luck for Chris Loeb, who's the prisoner who broke into. Chris Loeb was carjacking cars. He was breaking into cars and he was stealing shit from cars. His bad luck that night when he was out stealing stuff from cars is he broke into the chief of police car, which was James Burke, not knowing that it was the chief of police's car. When he broke in and he found sex toys and a snuff film in James Burke's car, which by the way may have been tied to Rex Heuermann. You watch, this is crazy shit. So when he found that out, Burke beat the fuck out of the guy in jail for something like 14 hours, I believe it was, threatened to kill his mother, said that they were going to give him a hot shot, which means they threatened to overdose him on drugs. Nobody would believe that he didn't overdose on drugs. He's a drug addict. He's a criminal. He's a fucking loser. Who's going to believe Chris Loeb's story? That's what they thought. So they beat the fuck out of him. They told him, look, you better like keep your mouth shut because we'll give you a hot shot. We'll just inject you with a shit ton of drugs and you'll just be left dead on the side of the road and nobody will believe it's anything other than a junkie who killed himself. Oh, shame. And by the way, prostitutes don't mean shit. They're garbage. They're just fucking disposable human beings. This was the mentality of the chief of police. And yes, he went to jail. And yes, the district attorney went to jail. But it's not stopping there. This story is bigger than you can imagine. Let's continue on. The suspect, Chris Loeb, would claim years later, because it took him a while, they claim years later on a podcast that Burke's bag contained incriminating evidence, including a DVD of a snuff film. Loeb alleged that the footage depicted a sex worker being tortured. By the way, we do know that this officer and another officer were using, just like Rex Heuermann, ads or apps to find sex workers and go hire sex workers. So we have multiple police officers using the same tools that Rex Heuermann allegedly used. Things like, for example, a Craigslist or Backpage or whatever the case, to find sex workers and then lure them to have sex with them. And then the officers were caught trying to harm sex workers because who fucking cares? They're prostitutes. Nobody gives a shit about prostitutes. So Loeb alleged that the footage that he saw depicted a sex worker being tortured. He claimed the woman was bound and crying as she begged for her life. Allegations have never been verified, nor have they been disproven. That's the big one, people. So yeah, okay, Chris Loeb is just a criminal. He's running his mouth. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't see something. What hasn't happened, by the way, according to The Sun, and maybe you don't view that as a reputable source, I get it. But the point being is that this is reported on many, many places. This is a story that's not going to go away. That it has not been disproven that there was a snuff film in James Burke's possession. So since John Ray joined the case in 2011, he says that rumors of snuff films and local group of sickos exchanging the materials have been rife. So John Ray says there is evidence of a snuff film ring going around at that time, and that people exchange these snuff films of murdered hookers, tortured hookers, that's just a thing that exists. One law enforcement source allegedly told Ray, the attorney, that Burke, the chief of police, once watched a snuff film at work. So a law officer who worked with Burke, the chief of police, said that he saw Burke watching a snuff film at work, and he openly laughed at the distressing images depicted on screen. So imagine the chief of police watching a woman screaming and begging for her life, a snuff film, a horrible, and he's laughing, thinking that shit's funny. That tells you the mindset of the chief of police and perhaps other officers who knew what was going on. It gets worse. Pay attention. A former colleague of Burke's, Rob Trotta, also told the U.S. Sun last year that Burke once asked him if he knew where to get a snuff film. So Burke is asking, according to those around him, a former colleague, an officer perhaps, or at least somebody who works in the police department, who heard Burke asking, hey, does anybody know how we can get a snuff film? And laughing when he sees a snuff film. Again, all allegations by other officers allegedly passed along to the attorney who's looking into this. Now, Ray urged investigators after this investigators to re-examine the chief of police, Burke, and explore any potential social ties he may have shared with Rex Heuermann, the Long Island serial killer. Yeah, no shit. And I thought to myself when I heard this, of course, what are the odds that the chief of police actually has social ties with Rex Heuermann? Fucking pretty good. Let's take a look. Speaking on June 7th, he said, I've always suggested that Rex Heuermann was involved in a very serious dark web porn, and that has now been confirmed by prosecutors. And now, so he's basically, the attorney is saying, look, I've always thought that Rex Heuermann was involved in dark web porn, snuff films, and it's been confirmed by prosecutors who said on Rex Heuermann's hard drive were depictions of women being tortured and killed, and we're not sure it's not homemade porn. It may be stuff that he actually recorded of his own murders. And now we're looking at whether Heuermann recorded that kind of material himself. And the inference I got last week is that he was taking photos or possibly making films of the victims. So again, we have to ask, is Rex Heuermann making snuff films for his own personal gratification, or even for his friends, or for sale? Who knows? The chances are he did a very, the chances he did are very high. They might not just have been found yet, and that's a big yet. So in other words, Ray believes that we will find hard definitive proof that Rex Heuermann was making snuff films and that it may be tied to law enforcement in some way. Would that fucking blow your mind? Would that make you interested in this case? Are you intrigued a little bit? Because I'm intrigued, even if it doesn't go anywhere right now. As soon as you get police corruption and police officers and chief of police going to jail and district attorneys covering up for the police officers going to jail, I'm suddenly interested. I don't know about you. And in that regard, we have to see whether he was connected to, I think Rex Heuermann was connected to former Chief Burke, because it seems that Burke had a similar taste and a similar interest in that kind of material. Yeah. So Ray, the attorney, wants to know, hey, is there any connection between Chief Burke and Rex Heuermann? Because Chief Burke seems to be watching snuff films and thinking it's funny. He may have had a snuff film in his possession, according to Chris Loeb, who was a prisoner who was beaten under his watch. And then we find out that Rex Heuermann is making snuff films. It seems like there could be a connection. Let's look into it. Ray added that Burke needs to be looked at right now by detectives working the Gilgo Beach probe. He said he believes there's a tapestry of perverts operating on Long Island and exchanging the kinds of materials described in Heuermann's indictment. The connections are widespread and bizarre. There's no telling where all this is going to take us, said Ray. And I am on board for that shit. Again, I am not, and I want to make sure everyone's clear, because some people get me wrong at the devil's advocates. Devil's advocates is just trying to always sympathize with every killer. I'm not sympathizing with the killer. What I am critical about is law enforcement who uses prostitutes, refers to prostitutes as garbage like they don't exist because they're just prostitutes. Who gives a shit? And then tries to hide the work of a serial killer because they might actually themselves be purchasing and participating in a snuff film industry like the movie 8mm. That shit would not fly in my world, and I would lose my shit, which is why I'm going to cover this story, because I want to see where this rabbit hole goes. Now, There's a whole web of these people, and do they know each other? And they do know each other, not just so there's the whole web of people, and they do know each other, either just online or maybe in passing socially, but they're all in the same field of perversion. Is Burke connected to all this, Chief of Police? It's something investigators need to look at. Now, here we go, horrifying stuff. During a symposium in January, Ray shared previously unreleased statements from several women that he claims to have shared frightening and violent past encounters with Rex Heuermann. Here we go. Here we go. One of the statements issued by a woman identified under the pseudonym Alice Poe established alleged social ties between Rex Heuermann and Chief of Police James Burke. According to Alice Poe, she met Heuermann in 1993. That's the same time Rex Heuermann allegedly did his first murder, at a party hosted by James Burke, Chief of Police, at a budget inn along Montauk Highway in Patchogue. I can't remember how to pronounce it. Patchogue, I think, is how it's pronounced, New York. Gosh, I'm going to get slaughtered. I just had this a minute ago. Anyways, point being, Alice Poe met Rex Heuermann, 1993, around the time of his first murder, at a party hosted by the then, I don't think at that point he was the Chief of Police, James Burke, he was a cop, I think at that time, James Burke at a budget hotel. Now, pay attention. Right there, you have somebody placing Heuermann and Burke as knowing each other. It gets crazy. Alice was then a 16-year-old runaway living at the motel at the time. Alice claims she was invited to a party one Friday evening by a young mother she befriended who also lived out of the hotel, per a copy of the affidavit obtained by the U.S. Sun. So again, the paper, the U.S. Sun, the tabloid U.S. Sun, did reach out and get a copy of the affidavit and proved, or at least confirmed, that this is somewhat true, that we know it's somewhat true, I should say. They're not saying it's just somewhat true. I'm saying they've actually taken steps to verify the story that's being told here. So Alice said the woman led her to an L-shaped room with 2 beds and little else, and it was being occupied by a group of men who were drinking heavily. There was one other white man who was there. He was the life of the party, talking to everyone. He tried to convince me to get mad at my boyfriend, who was not there, Poe's statement read. This boisterous person was none other than soon-to-be, I believe it's soon-to-be, because I don't think he was at this time, the Chief of Police, James Burke, she further claimed. So this loudmouth, talkative, charismatic guy, life of the party, at this party when she's 16, underage, and a sex worker, is there with what is going to be police officer and Chief of Police James Burke. I was told by someone at the party he was a cop. So he was a cop at this point, not the Chief of Police, I believe. I'm trying to make sure I get my timing right. I don't believe he was Chief of Police at this point. He was the life of the party. He was a cop at the time. So she's told, underage girl at a party with a bunch of drinking men, that this guy who's the life of the party is a cop. Hey, by the way, this guy's a cop. Okay. I've seen pictures of James Burke when he was a cop. I am certain that this talkative man at the party was in fact James Burke. So Alice has come forward and say, I remember this party when I was 16 years old. I remember what he looks like. And then when I saw pictures of James Burke's the cop, I'm like, yeah, that's James Burke. That's the guy who was there. That's the guy who was the cop at the party at the underage girl prostitution. And he's engaging in it, doing drugs with other cops and stuff. Alice alleges that Burke was passing around a crack pipe to other men at the party. That sounds like that just can't be true, right? Cops don't do this shit. This can't be true. It's got to be some hooker's word against the police, because we know the police always tell the truth, and she's just a hooker. So I'm sure this is not going to come out to be true. Being sarcastic, of course, because some of you don't get sarcasm, and you're like, I can't believe you just said hookers can't be trusted. Devil's advocate. You got to take some skills on sarcasm. All right. So Alice alleges that Burke was passing around a crack pipe to other men at the party and goading them to smoke it, though she didn't see him consume the drug herself. At one stage, she claims the cop repeatedly attempted to force her to take a hit of the pipe, but she refused. So he's not only doing illegal drugs, he's trying to get an underage girl to do illegal drugs who's there for the purposes of sex and prostitution, which is illegal. And this cop is okay with all of that shit. Already, I've got problems. She refused, causing his demeanor to change from the life of the party to hostile and aggressive. Oh, look. It's kind of the acts of maybe somebody who could be a serial killer. Burke, by the way, here's just a headline. This is out of the story, but I wanted to highlight it. Burke was arrested in August 2023 after allegedly attempted to solicit sex from an undercover park ranger. Yeah, it's not the first time that Burke has been caught soliciting prostitutes. But we'll put that aside for a minute. Oh yeah, by the way, here, police believe it's likely some of Heuermann's alleged murders took place inside his family home. We'll put that on the back burner. Let's go back to the story, though. Later, Alice, this is the 16-year-old recalling her, or this prostitute, former sex worker, recalling when she was 16 years old and living under hard times, being basically taken advantage of by police officers in a hotel room doing drugs and being passed around like a hockey puck. This is where she says she claims that there was a knock on the door at this party and a large man that she believes to be Heuermann entered the room. Now we've got her in her memory saying, not only when I was young was I being solicited by cops for sexual favors, but they knew Rex Heuermann. And in walks Rex Heuermann. I couldn't make this shit up. This is in mainstream media sources. This has been repeated by many mainstream media sources. I'm just using one, and I apologize for not finding a better one. But sometimes the more salacious ones get to the heart of the matter because the other ones try to really cover the shit up. So I think we're going to use a not so great news source because you can dive into how reputable this source is through those mainstream sources that you prefer that probably are whitewashing and trying to be like, cops don't do this kind of shit. So we're gonna kind of word it a little differently. This is the stuff where it's take the gloves off and you can take a look at where the names really go. All right, I digress. The large man, who was Rex Heuermann, she believes, who appeared at the party where James Burke was at. Now you have a direct connection from the chief of police to Rex Heuermann, who James Burke will later try to cover up the investigation into the Long Island serial killer. If you're not making these connections, I'm going to try to make it for you. James Burke will later become the chief of police and dismantle the task force looking into the alleged serial killer Rex Heuermann, who apparently was with James Burke back in the early days of his killings, and was this large man that this woman sees at a party when she was 16 years old. However, she claims that Burke ran and blocked the door to prevent her from leaving. So she tried to take, this large man comes in, listen to that. So large man's presence caused a commotion among the other people already at the party. So when Rex Heuermann allegedly enters the party, people start getting agitated. It's like as if people know, what the fuck is this guy coming in? This guy's a monster. What's about to happen? People are getting agitated. This is what I'm seeing in my mind. I'm making the story up as I go. But I'm thinking what she's saying is when this large man comes into the door, people start getting agitated. She tries to take off. Something feels right. She knows something bad's about to happen. This rings so much of the Machine from 8mm, this imposing individual. When he shows up, he's like a machine. He just works on you and kills you until you're dead because he's a machine. You can't stop him once he's in motion. This is what that has that whole feel about. The big imposing physical figure comes in to do a killing or whatever, and people are like, ooh, and she takes off. But the cop, James Burke, blocks her route. I couldn't make this shit up if I tried. This is why I wanted you to see it in mainstream sources so that you don't think I'm just making that shit up. All right. I began to feel frightened, she says. This is recalling her time as a young 16-year-old. I began to feel frightened and tried to think of a way to get out of that room that wouldn't appear like I was attempting to leave permanently. So she's going to try to like, hey, I just want to go for a smoke or whatever the case may be. She's trying to make an excuse to get away so she can run. I approached the man with the brown hair, this I believe who is Rex Heuermann, and asked him if I could have a cigarette and if he would come outside with me to smoke it. I planned to tell him that I was going to go to my room for cigarettes once outside because I didn't like his brand, and he agreed and we went outside. So her plan was that she went out willingly with Rex Heuermann to get away from the other cops and people in the room to get one-on-one with him, and then she was going to try to make her slip from the big hulking ogre Rex Heuermann, allegedly, once she gets away from the cops. So she's working herself out of this situation. Once outside, Alice claims that she encountered Heuermann, who was wearing a flannel shirt and leaning up against the wall of the hotel room, crouched at such an angle that she could not immediately see how tall he was at first. He was pleasant to me. He seemed nerdy to me. I began to relax, recounted Alex. I asked the man where he's from. He told me that they were friends from Long Island and liked to party. So here we got, if it is Rex Heuermann, admitting he's friends with the people inside the house that like to party, which happen to be cops. More than one cop, I think, what they've already said is in that room. And Rex Heuermann knows the cops. Isn't that fucking interesting? If it's Rex Heuermann, and if this story can be believed, and if the word of a hooker can be believed, again, sarcasm, stop it, stop it. All right. He told me that when they wanted to hang out, the men would tell their wives that they had just taken a trip for business purposes. And he told me he wasn't married anymore. He said he owned a car dealership. Alice claims he made a sarcastic joke that a car dealership owner wouldn't need to go on business trips, but the comment failed to amuse the tall man. He began to look at me like he was angry. I told him I was going to go to my room to get cigarettes and began walking past him, wrote Alice. He quickly stood up from his leaning position, encircled me with his arm, urging me towards the door of the motel. He was now standing very close in front of me, and I looked up at him. I could see that he was huge. 6'4", Rex Heuermann, and a very large individual. I exclaimed that, my God, he was tall, and I could see that he was pleased at my shock. So she sees how big he is for the first time. He stands up, he encircles her. He's huge. He's an enormous guy. And she's like, oh my God, you're huge. And he's just like, yeah, I can fucking do whatever the fuck I want with you because I'm a monster. Reading into how she's seeing it, trying to make it understandable. I tried to joke, but he remained serious. I did not want to go back into that room. By the way, here's another headline. We're going to get back to the story in a second. James Burke's handling of Long Island serial killer investigation has been widely criticized since his dismissal as the chief of the Suffolk County Police Department in 2015. Here's an individual talking about here, Bologna. I think I don't know if it's Bologna or Bologna. I'm going to get hammered by calling him Bologna. Was warned. We're going to get into that. Retired Suffolk County Detective Rob Trotta also wants Burke to be investigated in connection with the Gilgo Beach murders, and also points out to his connection to police officers. Isn't that special? All right, let's continue with the story. To stall, Alice, this young girl, said that she feigned interest in a nearby car and asked the tall man to show it to her. When he brought me to the car, we were in the light and I could see him clearly. His size, his face, demeanor, his attitude deeply scared me, she recounted in the affidavit. He no longer spoke nicely to me. I told him that if he would wait, I would just need to go to my room to get cigarettes. I told him that I was scared because my room was far and in the dark area of the motel. I asked him to watch me and wait for me to return to keep him from suspecting that I was trying to get away, and he let me go. So she gets his trust by like, hey, can you watch out for me and protect me? And he's like, okay, I guess she's not going to run from me if she wants me to protect her. But she's pulling a ruse. Alice said that once out of sight, she ran back to her room terrified. Later that night, someone knocked on her door twice, but she didn't answer, and she didn't look outside. Alice said she never saw the man again. So she managed to not have anybody break in and kill her that night. Good for her. And she lives to tell the story as a grown woman who, again, maybe you don't believe her story. Maybe you think it's crazy. But the fact that anybody is coming out and saying, hey, look, Rex Heuermann knows the chief of police who stopped the investigation into Rex Heuermann, which they didn't know it was Rex Heuermann at the time, looks pretty fucking suspicious if you ask me. Now, years later in 2023, she said that she was watching the news when a report of Heuermann's arrest flashed on screen. She immediately recognized Heuermann as the tall man that had frightened her that night in 1993. So when she sees Rex Heuermann as the alleged Gilgo Beach serial killer, she was like, oh my God, that's the good guy back in 1993 that I was terrified for. And I would argue that if she was truly terrified by that ogreish man back then, she probably remembers his face pretty well. She had a lot of contact, according to her story. I had a lot of contact with this individual. Was one-on-one with him and terrified him. I'm sure that man's image was burned into her memory. And when she sees Rex Heuermann later in 2023 after being arrested as being the Long Island serial killer or the Gilgo Beach murder, she immediately recognizes him as the man who was there that night with her. Ray believes that Alice's testimony establishes a concrete social link between Heuermann and James Burke that speaks to a wider conspiracy at play in Suffolk County. I also would suggest that that's very possible. I'm just asking questions, but I would think that's very possible. Now, the hunt to find the Long Island serial killer began in late 2010 when the remains of missing sex workers, Melissa Bartholomew, was found along Ocean Parkway during a search for Shannon Gilbert. Within 2 days, 3 or more women were found dead near the roadside in similar positions to Bartholomew, bound with either duct tape or belts. Those are the names of the individuals: Maureen Bernard Barnes, Amber Lynn Costello, Megan Waterman as well. By mid-2011, 7 more sets of remains would be found, Shannon among them. However, Shannon Gilbert's death was ruled an accident by the police. Well, that would be great and dandy if the police weren't actually part of the mystery in this case. So police were like, nothing to see here. Shannon was an accident. She just drowned in a field or died of hypothermia, even though she had broken bones in her throat, suggesting that she was strangled to death. And she had just called 911 screaming that someone's trying to kill her and was running for help, knocking on everybody's door. But when they told Shannon Gilbert they're going to call 911, she took off because she's afraid of the police. I wonder why Shannon Gilbert would be afraid of the police. I mean, it's not like police ever get involved in prostitution rings and doing snuff film rings. I mean, that would be crazy. So maybe she doesn't trust police. I don't know why she wouldn't. Police are the good guys. Anyways, Ray and Shannon's family have long contested the ruling, insisting that she was murdered and her death was covered up by powerful locals who were friends with Burke, the chief of police. Holy shit, this story, people. Burke stepped down as the chief after his arrest in 2015. The following year, he pled guilty to violating the civil rights of Christopher Loeb, which is the guy that broke into his car and found that snuff film, allegedly, and orchestrating the cover-up of his crimes with the help of then District Attorney Thomas Spoda, who also goes to jail. The district attorney goes to jail. The district attorney who got James Burke, the corrupt cop, promoted to chief of police. Tom Spoda, multiple people, high level, chief of police, district attorney, going to jail for their roles in beating people, covering up crimes, covering up for police misconduct. Do I need to say more? I think I could. After his conviction, numerous details about Burke's troubling past, corrupt antics, and alleged sexual exploits would come to the fore. The allegations included frequent consumption of hard drugs, patronizing sex workers, cross-dressing, and a history of violent behavior. These are all James Burke's allegations. James Burke had a history of consumption of drugs, patronizing sex workers, cross-dressing, and violent behavior. Ex-Suffolk County Detective Rob Trotta claimed that Burke's sordid escapades were an open secret among the department. Other law enforcement officers knew this was the kind of guy he was. That's why they were, how the fuck did that guy get promoted? He like goes to prostitutes and shit. And he's a violent, sick individual who likes snuff films. I'm reading a little bit into that. That's the attitude of his fellow officers. But yet somehow it was this open secret. Hey, we're just going to not talk about our chief of police might be killing prostitutes in the area and doesn't give a shit about prostitutes because they're just hookers. Who cares? Trotta and a handful of his colleagues authored an anonymous letter to the county commissioner. Anonymously, so Trotta anonymously, along with some other colleagues, officers perhaps, wrote an anonymous letter to the commissioner, Steve Bellone, or Bellone, in 2011, months before Burke's appointment as chief, urging that Bellone to reconsider and highlighting a number of his prior transgressions. I realize, man, every time I say this guy's name two ways, I'm going to have somebody busting my balls telling me how I need to get it right. I will try to get it right, but I'm getting sick and tired of having my nuts busted when that's not the important part. How to pronounce that name is not really the important part of the story. So piss off a little bit and give me some grace. All right. Mentioned in the letter was that Burke was known to frequent prostitutes, routinely threatened his subordinates, other officers, routinely threatened other officers, his subordinates. In 1995, 2 years after his alleged encounter with Alice Poe, he was disciplined after having sex with a prostitute in his patrol car. Jesus. All right. Trotta, who reluctantly retired a year after Burke's appointment, said that he was unsurprised to see that the wheels come off the Burke regime so quickly, but should have never been permitted to become a police officer in the first place, let alone the chief. Rumors were always everywhere, said Trotta. Everyone knew this was a corrupt cop, and he got promoted to chief of police. And he's like, man, I don't know why the hell somebody didn't stop it. After I left the department and ran for office on 2 occasions, I was in a room with Steve Bellone and told him, you've got to fire this guy. This guy's crazy. Steve Bellone looked me in the eye and said, I stand by him. What message are you sending to the rank and file cops that you go have sex with a prostitute in your police car and then you can still go on to become the chief of police? It blows me away. Yeah, F you guys. If this is not a problem for you in America, I don't know. I'm trying to get you interested in this story. I'm trying. Burke pleaded guilty to violating civil rights of Chris Loeb and orchestrating a cover-up of his crimes. That's another headline that's kind of wedged in here in the midst of this story. We're almost done with this story. We've got one little small one left to go. Wow, this is a long intro. Hopefully you stay with it. Rumors, conspiracy, and innuendo have followed Burke around for years. After his arrest in 2015, various local officials, including Trotta, State Senator Phil Boyle, and John Ray, the detective, all called for Burke to be investigated in connection with the LISK, Long Island serial killer case, believing him to be a compelling suspect. I believe they're saying they believe James Burke, chief of police, is a compelling suspect in the murders of women in the area. He tends to get off on the idea of women being murdered, snuff films, laughing at it. It's no big deal. Refers to amongst his colleagues as who cares? They're just prostitutes, frequents prostitutes, and is violent with prostitutes. Everyone knows this. So therefore, in some people's mind, a very small, perhaps, select a number of individuals in law enforcement think that maybe he might be a suspect himself. And that's why I'm intrigued in this story. Again, not to get Rex Heuermann off, because I'm not saying Rex Heuermann isn't a serial killer. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying, is he the only serial killer? How many serial killers? How many killers are there? Were they paying a serial killer who was like a machine from 8mm who would do what they wanted him to do for money or jollies or whatever. And that sounds crazy, just completely the stuff of movies. Burke has never been formally accused or charged with any crimes relating to the Gilgo investigation. Yeah. However, Ray likened Burke to Heuermann, insisting the two men appear to have been cut from the same deviant cloth. Yeah. Ray held a press conference on June 13 and leveled a series of accusations about Heuermann's daughter, Victoria Heuermann, and her alleged social media activity. And I think that's all we need for that article. We will now wrap up with one last one. A new officer also involved in rapes, prostitution, all kinds of shit from Suffolk County. What the fuck's going on in Suffolk County Police? What's going on with the Suffolk County Police and in that area? So here's Islip, your local news for Islip, New York. Suffolk cop George Trimiglizio, God damn it, Glazzi. I'll get that guy's name right. That's a long one. That's an Italian name, isn't it? I don't even know how to pronounce that. Somebody help me out, but don't bust my balls about it. I'm doing my best. Again, his name isn't as important, although I'd like to get this guy's name right. Okay, so we're gonna call him George T for now because I don't want to slaughter the piss out of it. We're almost done. A suspended Suffolk County police officer allegedly is facing charges. By the way, what's the date on this article? July 7th. This is what's today? July 7th. Okay, so this is from today. Suffolk cop George T charged with rape. A suspended Suffolk County police officer allegedly facing charges in a sex trafficking case is now accused of sexually assault. He's already arrested and under investigation for sex trafficking, and now he's being investigated for 2 more assaults of women that he lured through dating apps. Like Rex Heuermann using Craigslist and Backpage, using dating apps to lure prostitutes into their death. And this officer also, like James Burke, uses dating apps or sites like that to lure in hookers. Who gives a shit? They're just hookers. Lures them in off of dating apps, prosecutors say. George T, 56, about the same age as Rex Heuermann, by the way, of Islip, was indicted for sexual abuse, rape, and unlawful imprisonment in Suffolk County on Wednesday, May 21st, in connection with 2 alleged assaults in 2021 and 22. The first assault happened in May 2021 after T went on a date in Pachog, I gotta get all these names right, with a woman that he met online, according to prosecutors. After asking her to sit in his car to talk, he allegedly moved into the passenger seat and forcibly touched her without consent. When the woman attempted to open the car door to escape, T slammed it shut and blocked her exit, prosecutors say. The second alleged incident occurred in June 22, when after T met a woman online and the two went on a date in the Hampton Bay area. The woman invited T inside her home to sober up after drinking, but once in her home, he pushed her onto the bed and raped her, prosecutors allege. These latest charges come as T allegedly already awaits trial in a sweeping October 2024 indictment accusing him of helping run a network of brothels across Suffolk County. Police officer involved in running brothels, running sex workers in Suffolk County. What the fuck is going on in your county, people? Clean that shit up immediately. What the hell is wrong with you guys? Anyways, T, an 18-year-old veteran of Suffolk County Police Department, was indicted alongside 3 others. 18-year veteran of Suffolk County Police Department indicted alongside 3 other police officers? Sounds like it. Other police officers, including, so we got like 4 cops maybe involved in this, including a Islip school teacher, looking up for your kids and running brothels and sex racketeering and officers assaulting women. Holy shit. In a years-long prostitution and sex trafficking operation tied to multiple massage parlors on Long Island. We're almost done, people. We're almost done. I'm just trying to get your attention. I hope I have your attention. Prosecutors allege that from 2019 to 24, T and his co-defendant Stephen Airy managed sex workers and collected proceeds. The cops managing sex workers. They're basically enforcing pimps, if you will, luring girls into sex work for them. And here's how they do it. Working under the direction of Frank Saggio, the alleged ringleader, the group is accused of exploiting non-English speaking women by forcing them into prostitution through deceptive lease agreements. So they would use lease agreements, make it so the girls can't pay their rent. And I swear this is something out of a fucking Forum magazine. I'm going to get the next door neighbor to owe me rent money, and I'm going to make her suck my dick for rent money. This is what cops are doing. And a school teacher. The illegal operation began to unravel in March 2021 when a 911 call about a robbery at an American girls' spa in Holbrook led to a broader investigation. T, who was on duty at the time, allegedly abandoned his post and raced to the spa in his patrol car, later falsifying police records to cover up his involvement. Holy shit, cops don't do this. I realize, I mean, we just got done. We just, in a way, we're not done. We just got done with the whole Brian Koberger thing. And I know cops don't falsify records and that kind of thing either, because cops don't do shit like that. Cops don't do illegal shit, get involved in illegal things, and then falsify records and to make a guy go down for something so that they can hide their own investigation, their own participation. That kind of shit doesn't happen, except for maybe in Suffolk County. Anyways, Suffolk County District Attorney Raymond Tierney said that the growing case represents a shocking betrayal of public trust. Yes, this is my problem. You, law enforcement, mainstream media, and the judicial system, you have our trust, supposedly. You've lost that trust a long time ago. There are many, many, many great cops. So please understand, I have no problem with great cops. I think the majority of cops are probably good, but the bad ones are a disgrace to our country. They're a disgrace to the badge. And that officers will turn the other way and wonder silently why nobody's doing anything about a bad cop. Fucking root that shit out. Get these MFers out of your system. It's a disgrace to the badge. It's a disgrace to your country. Don't let these MFers continue to cover up their crimes, run sex rings, possibly run a fucking snuff ring. Go watch 8mm. Get yourself caught up. This is not over.